I never used to fear the ocean. I grew up by it, lived by it, served on it. I thought I understood it. Thought I understood its temperament, its quiet indifference, its fury, its vastness. I thought it was just water, deep sure, but only that. I don't think that anymore. Because water isn't supposed to whisper. It isn't supposed to watch you back. Maybe if I had seen it sooner, if I had listened, none of this would have happened. But we always think we have more time. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of an anomaly. The USS Sean Paul John was running routine drills, tracking simulated threats across a seemingly endless blue horizon. RIMPAC was in full swing, the world's largest maritime exercise, a grand spectacle of international power and cooperation. It should have been nothing more than another year of calculated strategy, of war games played beneath the unrelenting Pacific sun. Instead, we got a go signal. Lieutenant Hopper. The voice yanked me from my thoughts. I turned, spotting Petty Officer Marcus at the communications console, a deep crease between his brows. We're picking up something weird. Weird how? Marcus tapped a few keys, isolating the signal. A steady pulse. It wasn't anything immediately recognizable. No standard military encryption, no civilian frequency. Not even the garbled nonsense of a stray radio reflection. It's coming from the deep, he muttered, turning in his chair. Sonar picked up a return, but there's nothing out there. I leaned in listening. At first, it was nothing more than a hum, but as I focused, something else lurked beneath it. A rhythm, deliberate and wrong. It wasn't static. It wasn't interference. It was structured, like a message. Run it through decryption, I said. Marcus gave a sharp nod, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Around us, the bridge crew moved through their routines, too distracted by their own tasks to notice the way the atmosphere shifted. Something imperceptible had changed in the air, something that made my pulse tick up. Sir, Marcus called after a long silence. You might want to hear this. I took the headset and pressed it against my ear. At first, all I heard was the same pattern, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then, beneath it, something else. A whisper. Not in English. Not in any language I recognized. But somehow, instinctually, I understood. You were seen. I yanked the headset off. What the hell was that? Marcus's expression was pale, his fingers hovering uncertainly over the controls. I don't know, sir. It just started. The signal pulsed again. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, it stopped. Silence fell over the bridge. Outside the reinforced glass, the Pacific stretched endlessly, a black mirror beneath the dimming sky. Too still, too empty. Something was watching us. The next 48 hours passed without incident. At least, that's what we told ourselves. We were ordered to continue with the exercise, to ignore the signal, to act as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something we weren't talking about. Men were starting to complain of dreams. I woke up one night to the sound of Marcus whispering in his sleep, his voice repeating words I didn't understand, his hands twitching against the sheets like he was trying to pull something out of the air. When I shook him awake, he didn't remember a thing. And then we saw the sky split open. It started as a flicker, just a shimmer above the clouds, the kind of thing you might mistake for heat mirage. But then, the air itself seemed to ripple, bending the light, warping the stars. And something fell through. I was on deck when it happened, standing with Captain Yugi Nigel of the Japanese destroyer JDS Myoko. We had been coordinating joint maneuvers when a tremor ran through the air, a deep vibration that rattled in our bones. Nigel was the first to look up. I followed his gaze, my breath catching in my throat. Above us, the sky was wrong. Something huge, something impossible, was descending. At first, it looked like a meteor. A massive, black-shaped cut across the atmosphere, trailing fire, cutting toward the Earth with impossible speed. But there was no impact, no explosion, just a low, droning hum that made my teeth vibrate. The object passed overhead and vanished beyond the horizon, plunging into the sea. Silence. And then, the tsunami alarms began to wail. The ocean moved in ways it shouldn't have. It didn't crash like a normal wave. It recoiled, pulling back too far, too deep like a breath before a scream. Then, A wall of water rose from the horizon, higher than anything I had ever seen. We braced for impact. And then, at the last possible second, the wave stopped. It didn't roll forward. It didn't break. It held, like something was keeping it there. Something big. The USS Samson, Myoko, and our ship, Sean Paul John, were caught inside the Anomaly. The wave never touched us. But beyond the force field that had suddenly materialized over the Pacific, the world seemed frozen in place. All radar, all communications gone. And then, the water began to churn. From the depths, they surfaced. The first warship rose unnaturally, water cascading from its plated hull like it was being birthed from the void. Its shape was wrong, angled and fluid all at once, a fusion of something mechanical and organic. The other two followed, emerging in silence. No radio contact. No response to our hails. They weren't here to talk. The moment the warning shot was fired, the world split apart. Myoko was the first to go. A sudden burst of light erupted from one of the alien ships, tearing through steel like it was paper. Then came Samson. The ship didn't sink. It was pulled. 1 second, it was there. Guns firing, alarms screaming. And the next, it was gone, dragged into the depths, vanishing beneath the unnatural black of the ocean. I saw Commander Stephen Hopper's face on the last transmission. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't even moving. He was just staring at something behind me, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Then the feed cut out. Sean Paul John was the only one left, and I was in command. We retreated, not because we wanted to, but because it was the only option. The force field held us inside, the radio was dead, and the ocean was shifting beneath us. Something else was rising. The battle hadn't even started. We had only been noticed, and I knew, in the marrow of my bones, that the thing beneath the waves was not here to fight us. It was here to watch, because we had made a mistake. We had sent a signal, and something had answered. We didn't know it then, but we had already lost. At first, it felt like we were still in control, still operating under the illusion that this was just another engagement, another battle we could win with tactics and firepower. But war implies a conflict between forces of equal measure. This was something else, something older, something that had been waiting. Hours passed. No more attacks came. No more alien warships surfaced. The USS Sean Paul John floated in a dead sea, silent and adrift. Every system was still down. No radar, no satellite link, no contact with the outside world. The force field had turned the ocean into a void. And the water had changed. It was darker than it should have been. Not like ink, not like oil, but like a blackness that absorbed light. When I looked over the side of the deck, I couldn't see the reflection of the ship. There was no depth, no surface, only the abyss staring back. I told myself it was just an illusion, just a trick of the unnatural conditions, but the truth was I had stopped seeing the ocean as water. It felt like something else now, something alive. The crew was restless. We had survivors from Myoko, including Captain Yugi Nigel, a man who had always exuded quiet confidence. Now his face was drawn tight, his movements measured. He was seeing it too. Petty Officer Marcus, who had first picked up the Anomaly, had stopped speaking altogether. He sat by the communications console, staring at the screen even though it was blank. "Marcus," I said, nudging his shoulder. He turned slowly, his pupils too large, his expression vacant. "Sir," he murmured. "You good?" A beat passed. Then, too soft. "I think it knows my name." Something cold slid down my spine. "What?" His mouth opened then closed. He shook his head. "Forget it." But I couldn't. That night, we tried to sleep. I dreamt of Stephen, my brother, sinking into the dark, his face pale, his lips moving but no sound coming out. Then, suddenly, he was standing in my cabin, wet, dripping, his uniform pristine. "You should leave," he whispered. I opened my mouth to speak, but I wasn't in my cabin anymore. I was in the ocean, not sinking, not floating, just suspended in a black nothingness. Something moved around me, not touching but close enough that I felt its shape. A pressure, a presence. And then, in the deep, a sound. Not words, not human, but I understood them anyway. "You called." I woke up gasping. By morning, we had lost 2 men. Gone. Just gone. No signs of struggle. No alarms. No trace of them in the security footage. 1 second they were standing at their posts, and then the next frame, they weren't there. We searched the ship. Every inch. Nothing. Man overboard, someone suggested. But we all knew the truth. There was no overboard anymore. The ocean wasn't taking them. It was consuming them. Nigel was the first to say it out loud. We need to get off this ship. We were in the officers' quarters. The remaining command staff crammed into the small space. The air felt heavy, too thick, as if the room itself was suffocating us. Escape where? I asked. We're trapped. There's no way through the force field. There has to be, he insisted. I rubbed a hand down my face. My head ached. My vision blurred at the edges. Then Marcus spoke. It's not a force field. Everyone turned. His voice was different. Calm. Distant. It's not technology, he said. It's something else. My stomach twisted. What do you mean? I asked. Marcus blinked. His lips parted slightly, like he was listening to something far away. Then he looked at me and said, It's awake. Nobody moved. The words shouldn't have meant anything. But they did. We all felt it. The next 3 hours were chaos. Marcus collapsed after his outburst, convulsing on the floor, blood trickling from his nose. Then the whispering started. It came through the ship's intercom, a voice that wasn't a voice, slipping through the speakers in wet, clicking syllables. At first, it was just noise. But then, the longer we listened, the more we began to understand. The words slid into our heads, rearranging themselves into meaning. We see you. We hear you. Come closer. The lights flickered. The metal around us groaned. And then, the engines died. We drifted. Not in a current. Not with the waves. Something was pulling us. The ship tilted forward, slow at first, then harder, like it was being dragged down into something not visible to the eye. The black water widened beneath us. It was opening. Nigel grabbed my arm, his grip vice tight. Hopper, we have to move. Now. I hesitated. Then, something breached the surface. Not a ship. Not an alien craft. A shape. Rising. Massive. Towering above us. Casting a shadow that blotted out the stars. The ocean was a mouth. It had always been a mouth. And it had just begun to speak. We ran. I don't know why. There was nowhere to go. But we ran. Down corridors, through hatchways, shouting orders that didn't mean anything anymore. The ship was sinking. Not into the water. Into something deeper. I heard Marcus laughing somewhere in the distance, his voice wet, gurgling. I saw the walls start to twist, the metal bending like muscle. The intercom crackled. A final whisper. You are inside now. The last thing I remember before the darkness took us was the sound of something breathing, and the feeling of being watched from within. I woke up choking on salt. Not water. Salt. It was in my mouth, my throat clinging to my skin like a second layer of sweat. My head was full of static, my limbs heavy. It took me a moment to realize I was still on the USS Sean Paul John, or what was left of it. Everything was wrong. The ship wasn't moving. The deck beneath me felt too still, like it was suspended in something thicker than water. The air was dense, pressing down like we were miles beneath the surface, though there was no water in sight. I turned my head. Nigel was nearby, staring at the sky. Except it wasn't the sky. I followed his gaze, and my stomach twisted violently. Above us stretched a vast, colorless expanse. Not black, not gray, but an absence of color entirely. No stars, no clouds, no light. It was just open, and it went on forever. Nigel spoke without looking at me. We're not on the ocean anymore. I pushed myself up, my arms trembling. Around us, the ship groaned, metal flexing, bulkheads breathing. The others were stirring too. A handful of surviving crew, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. I spotted Marcus near the edge of the deck, sitting with his back against the rail, his fingers digging into his own forearm, drawing blood. They let us wake up, he murmured. I stared at him. What? They could have taken us in our sleep, he said, voice flat. They didn't. A cold realization curled in my gut. They wanted us awake for this. Then the fog rolled in. Not mist, not vapor. This was alive. It spilled over the deck in tendrils, creeping across the metal like fingers searching for something. I heard a voice whisper my name, not from the fog, from inside my head. I clenched my teeth, forcing myself to focus. Roll call, I barked, my voice cracking. Everyone sound off. A handful of replies came back. Too few. We had lost more. Not to the ocean, not to battle. Just gone. 1 second they had been there, and the next their stations were empty, their names barely clinging to memory. The first attack came without warning. One of the surviving crew, Hayden, let out a strangled sound. His body suddenly wrenched backward, his feet dragging against the deck as if something had hooked him from behind. We scrambled for him. Too slow. Something yanked him into the fog, and he vanished. No sound, no struggle. The fog swallowed him whole. Nigel grabbed my arm. "We need weapons," he said. "Against what?" But I didn't argue. We sprinted below deck, the air thick, clinging to our skin like oil. The passageways were different. The ship was changing. Walls that should have been familiar were stretching too long, too narrow, doors appearing where they shouldn't be. The overhead lights flickered in slow, unnatural rhythms, as if breathing. The ship was not ours anymore. It was theirs. I saw something move at the end of the hall. Not a person, a shape, bent wrong, folded in ways that didn't make sense. I raised my gun, but by the time I blinked, it was gone. We found the armory. The weapons were still there. Useless, maybe, but something. Nigel grabbed a shotgun, checking the chamber. If I go out, I want to go out fighting. I didn't tell him that I didn't think we had that choice. Because deep down, I knew the truth. This was not a battle. It was a process, and we were being prepared for something. We regrouped on the deck. The fog had pulled back, revealing something new. Structures. Impossible, monolithic things rising from the void. Too large, too ancient to have been built. They pulsed. The ship lurched forward. We weren't drifting anymore. We were being guided. Marcus exhaled sharply. "It's a mouth," he whispered. I turned to him. "What?" He didn't look at me. "It's not an ocean," he said. "It's an opening." A tremor ran through my bones. I knew he was right. We weren't lost. We were inside something, and it was closing around us. The air shimmered, bending like heat distortion. Then, they stepped through. Not from the mist. Not from the structures. From the gaps in reality itself. I don't have words for what they looked like. I can try. Tall, elongated, moving in ways that defied physics. Their shapes were fluid, shifting between solid and incorporeal. But the worst part wasn't how they looked. It was what they felt like. Concepts given form. Dissonance. Paradoxes standing upright. Just seeing them was an intrusion, like something was reaching into my skull, rearranging my thoughts. The crew collapsed one by one, clutching their heads, whispering prayers, gibbering nonsense. I fought to keep my balance, my mind fracturing at the edges. Then they spoke, not with words, with knowing. A thought, not my own, slid into my brain. "You called." I shook violently, my vision widening out. Memories blurred. Time stretched. I saw myself, older, changed, standing on a ship that was no longer metal, but bone, screaming without sound. The end of the world unfolding before me. I snapped back. Nigel was still up, breathing hard, his grip white-knuckled on his weapon. He locked eyes with me. "We have to destroy the ship." I hesitated. That was insane. But then I looked past him, to what was waiting for us in the mist. And I knew we wouldn't survive this. But we could stop it from spreading. We ran for the lower decks. The USS Sean Paul John had enough firepower in its munitions hold to turn this entire nightmare into ash. The walls twisted as we moved. The air groaned alive. We reached the armory, hauling explosive charges, planting them along the core framework. Marcus laughed as he worked, his voice sharp, unraveling. "You think fire will stop them?" "We don't have another choice," I growled. We set the timer. 5 minutes. No turning back. Then, the whispering turned to screaming. The creatures moved. No footsteps. No rush. Just instantaneous movement. One second they were behind us. The next they were between us and the exit. I raised my weapon. It did nothing. The bullets disappeared before they reached them. Reality itself was bending, breaking. I felt something press into my mind. Not a voice, not a presence, a suggestion, a choice. Stay. I hesitated, not because I wanted to, because some part of me already belonged to them. Nigel didn't wait. He grabbed me, yanking me toward the last escape route. We ran. I didn't look back, didn't see who didn't make it. The last thing I heard was Marcus's voice, soft, accepting. They'll show you too. Then, light, sound, and then, silence. The ship was gone, and we were not free. I opened my eyes to a sky that should not have been. There were no stars, no sun, just a vast, endless expanse of nothing. Not darkness, not light, but something beyond both. It stretched in all directions, boundless and silent, pressing against my mind like an unanswered question. I was lying on something solid, not metal, not earth, something smooth and warm, something that pulsed beneath me like a living thing. I forced myself to sit up, my breath ragged. Nigel was there. He was kneeling a few feet away, one hand gripping the ground, or what passed for ground in this place. His skin was pale, his lips parted in a slow exhale. "We survived," I said, my voice hoarse. Nigel didn't move. Then, softly, "Look around." I turned, and my stomach dropped. We were on an island. Not land, not anything made. An island of bodies. A vast, tangled mass of figures, frozen in time, fused together as if sculpted from a single piece of matter. Human, alien, things I could not name. Some had faces twisted in agony. Some had no faces at all. And beneath them, deep below, something was breathing. I felt it, a slow and terrible expansion, a pulse that sent tremors through the landscape. Nigel swallowed hard. We didn't escape. No, we hadn't. We had only gone deeper. There was no time, no way to measure it. The air was thick, heavy, pressing against my skin like a tide waiting to pull me under. There was no wind, no temperature. The sky above was neither near nor far. It simply was. Nigel touched his temple, wincing. "Can you hear that?" I strained my ears. At first, there was nothing. Then, a murmur. Faint, like voices calling from beneath the waves. Not words, not sound, but something older, something felt rather than heard. I wanted to answer it. A part of me already was. Nigel grabbed my arm, his grip an anchor. "Don't listen," he snapped. It took everything in me to pull away from the sound, to focus on what was real. If anything was still real. We walked, not toward anything, because there was no direction, just away from where we had woken up. The terrain shifted underfoot, the ground breathing, moving, stretching. Each step felt like it might be the last before I fell through. Then we saw them, figures in the distance, standing motionless. Not alien, not human, something else. Their forms were fluid, indistinct. Their edges blurred and flickered, shifting between presence and absence. And they were watching us. Nigel tensed. "We need to move." We turned, picking up the pace, and they moved with us. Not walking, just closer, like the space between us had simply collapsed. I felt something brush my mind, a whisper that was not a whisper. "Do you understand?" I staggered, gripping my head. Nigel grabbed me again, yelling something I couldn't hear. The whisper slid deeper. A knowing, a memory that was not my own, a vision, an ocean that was not an ocean, stretching beyond time, swallowing entire histories. A hunger that was not hunger, because hunger ends. This never would. It was not a thing, not a god, not a being. It was the absence between all things. And we had called it. We had given it form. Nigel was pulling me, dragging me backward, but my legs didn't feel real. The whisper deepened. "Do you understand?" I looked up. The figures were closer now, and I saw their faces. I knew them. Marcus, Hayden, my brother, Stephen, all of them staring back, their eyes hollow, their mouths moving in perfect unison. I tried to speak, tried to call out, but I had no voice. Because they were not there. Not anymore. They were only echoes. Nigel fired his weapon. The sound cracked through the silence, tearing me free. The figures didn't react, because they had never been real. They were just reflections of what had already been taken. Nigel pulled me forward, and we ran. The ground shifted beneath us. The sky tilted. The figures faded, but the whisper remained. A knowing presence pressed against my thoughts like a hand against glass. Watching, waiting. Then ahead of us, a doorway. Not built, not made. A fracture, an absence in reality itself. Through it I saw waves, a real ocean. Nigel grabbed my arm, his breath ragged. That's our way out. I wasn't sure, but there was nothing left here but consumption. So we ran for it. The whispering rose, a final warning. Not spoken, not in words, just a feeling. You will not return whole. Then we leapt, and the world broke. I woke up choking on salt, real water. The sun was too bright, too sharp against my eyes. Nigel was beside me, coughing, dragging himself onto a stretch of wet sand. We had made it. Somehow we had made it, but we were not the same. The USS Sean Paul John was gone. No wreckage, no debris, as if it had never existed, as if we had never existed. Later, they found us, a rescue team. We were listed as missing for 12 days, but we had only been gone for one night. They asked questions. We gave no answers, because we didn't have any. Not ones that made sense, not ones that belonged to this world. Nigel and I never spoke about it. Not really, but sometimes in the quiet, I hear it again. Not a voice, just a whisper, a reminder that we did not leave. We were let go, and one day, it will call us back.